Most preppers spend years planning for threats that will never reach their street. The actual threat already knows your garage code. Military counterintelligence identifies the highest risk threat actor as the one with pre-existing access, not the stranger, not the mob, the person who watched your Amazon deliveries for 3 years. One of these 7 neighbor types is more dangerous than an armed intruder. Most prepared households invited them inside the security perimeter voluntarily. This video profiles 7 neighbor archetypes that become dangerous after collapse, the behavioral indicators that precede escalation, and the doctrinal response each one requires. Everyone else is watching the horizon. You're going to learn to watch the fence line. Number 1, the Friendly Interrogator. This is counterintuitive. The most likable neighbor on your block is the most operationally dangerous person in phase 1 of a collapse. Not the hostile one, not the unstable one, the one who brings cookies at Christmas and asks how your kids are doing. Here's why. In military human collection, the most effective intelligence operatives don't look like spies. They look like friends. They build rapport over years. They ask casual questions. They observe without appearing to observe. Your friendly neighbor has been doing this passively for years without either of you recognizing it. Think about what they already know. They know your family composition, how many people live in your house, who comes and goes. They know your delivery patterns. They've watched pallets of freeze-dried food show up on your porch. They've seen the water filtration boxes. They've clocked the generator delivery. They know your political orientation from yard signs and bumper stickers. They know your approximate resource depth from every casual conversation you've ever had at the mailbox. Here's the civilian mistake. You assume friendliness equals safety. Counterintelligence doctrine doesn't. Doctrine classifies habitual curiosity as a collection indicator regardless of intent. Intent is irrelevant. The information exists. It's been gathered. It's stored in that person's memory. And under stress, that information doesn't stay contained. A trained intelligence operative needs 72 hours of dedicated surveillance to build a comprehensive target package on a household. Your friendly neighbor already possesses that package passively. They built it over 3 years of waving across the driveway. The danger isn't what they do with this information intentionally. It's what they reveal to others when they're scared, desperate, and talking too much. One panicked conversation with another neighbor undoes every OPSEC measure you ever took. Your countermeasure starts now, not after a collapse. Now. You audit what this person already knows. You stop volunteering new information. You redirect conversations away from supplies, plans, and preparations. You practice gray man principles at the neighborhood level. You become boring, forgettable, unremarkable. That is your first defensive layer. I've put together a complete guide on neighborhood threat assessment and OPSEC protocols that covers everything you need to know. First link in the description. Number 2, the substance-dependent neighbor. This isn't a moral judgment. This is pharmacology, and pharmacology doesn't negotiate. Alcohol withdrawal produces life-threatening symptoms within 24 to 72 hours. We're talking tremors, hallucinations, seizures, and a condition called delirium tremens that carries a mortality rate between 5 and 15% without medical intervention. Opioid withdrawal creates extreme agitation within 12 to 48 hours. The person becomes volatile, irrational, and physically desperate. Benzodiazepine withdrawal can trigger grand mal seizures and full psychosis within 1 to 4 days. These aren't psychological estimates, they're pharmacological certainties. The human body doesn't care about the circumstances. It doesn't care that supply chains collapsed. It doesn't care that pharmacies are closed. The withdrawal clock starts the moment the last dose metabolizes, and that clock produces a behavioral output that is violent, unpredictable, and completely immune to verbal de-escalation. Military detainee medical protocols treat withdrawal as a force protection issue, not a medical issue, a force protection issue, because a person in acute withdrawal is a physical threat to everyone in proximity. They will do things they would never do sober. They will cross boundaries they would never cross stable. The behavioral output isn't a choice. It's a biochemical cascade that overrides executive function. Here's what most people miss. You probably know which neighbor this is. You've seen the recycling bin. You've noticed patterns. The civilian mistake is categorizing addiction as a moral failing and assuming the person will simply cope. The operational reality is that you're living next to a medical countdown with a known detonation window. You don't need to diagnose them. You need to recognize that within 72 hours of supply disruption, their behavior becomes a variable you cannot predict or control. Your countermeasure is distance and early recognition. You identify this household before a crisis. You monitor for behavioral changes in the first 48 hours of any disruption. You do not engage when symptoms present. You do not attempt intervention. You maintain physical standoff. A person in acute withdrawal is not your neighbor anymore. They are a medical emergency with no ambulance coming. Number 3, the self-appointed authority. This one doesn't want your food. They want something more dangerous. They want control. Every neighborhood has this person. They ran the HOA with an iron fist. They organized the block party like a military operation. They already see themselves as the natural leader of your street. A collapse doesn't create this impulse. It removes the constraints that kept it in check. Military civil affairs doctrine has a specific classification for this archetype. Local power broker. In every conflict zone, in every disaster area, these individuals emerge within the first 72 hours. They don't need physical capability. They don't need weapons. They need 3 to 5 compliant neighbors. That's the threshold. 3 to 5 people who defer to their authority, and they become an extraction mechanism aimed directly at your household. Here's how it unfolds. They organize a neighborhood meeting. They frame resource sharing as a moral obligation. They publicly identify which households are prepared. They use phrases like community responsibility and fair distribution. They create a social framework where your refusal to comply makes you the villain. And now you're not facing one person. You're facing collective pressure backed by moral certainty. Multiple disaster after action reports document exactly this pattern. Self-appointed leaders organizing forced sharing protocols and identifying stockpiled households to desperate groups. This is not theoretical. This is documented. After Katrina, after Sandy, after every prolonged regional disruption where formal authority disappeared and informal authority filled the vacuum, your countermeasure is preemptive invisibility. You cannot argue with a mob that believes it holds moral authority. You don't win that argument. You avoid it entirely by ensuring this person never has the information needed to target your household. You never attend the meeting. You never confirm or deny your preparedness level. You present as equally desperate. If they already know you're prepared, your options just narrowed to compliance or confrontation. Neither is good. Number 4, the desperate parent. This is the entry nobody wants to hear. It's the one you need to hear most. A parent with hungry children operates on biological override. Every social norm, every boundary, every relationship collapses simultaneously. This isn't a decision they make. It's a biological imperative that overwrites every other consideration in their brain. Military rules of engagement training explicitly addresses this scenario. Civilians, including families, used as screens for hostile action, and the decision paralysis it creates in defenders. You've trained to identify threats. You've gamed out scenarios with aggressive males approaching your property. You have zero framework for a mother standing on your porch holding a starving child. And that gap in your mental preparation is the most dangerous vulnerability in your entire defensive plan. Documented accounts from the Bosnian conflict show parents transitioning from peaceful residence to armed resource seizure within days of children going hungry. Post-Katrina New Orleans produced identical patterns. Families that had been cooperative neighbors for decades became direct threats within 96 hours of food supply interruption. The transition isn't gradual, it's a switch, and it flips when a child hasn't eaten in 2 days. Here's the compounding danger. This archetype carries emotional leverage that no other threat on this list possesses. They don't just threaten your resources directly. They become the most effective recruiter of collective action against your household. One parent telling the neighborhood that you have food while children are starving mobilizes more people faster than any self-appointed authority ever could. They weaponize empathy. Not intentionally, not strategically, but the effect is identical. Your countermeasure is the hardest one on this list. You make the decision now, before the crisis, before the emotion. You decide your threshold, your response, and your limits in advance. Because you will not be capable of rational decision-making when that scenario presents itself in real time. You either have a plan for this or you have a crisis. There is no middle ground. You also ensure this household never has specific knowledge of your supply depth. General neighborhood awareness that you might have some extra food is manageable. Specific knowledge that you have 6 months of provisions for a family of 4 is a targeting package. Number 5. The Covert Operator. Now pay attention to this. This neighbor never confronts you, never asks, never threatens. They take. Systematic theft using collapse chaos as operational cover. Siphon fuel from your vehicles. Raided garden plots at night. Items disappearing from outbuildings, sheds, and garages. Small amounts you might not notice for days or weeks. Force protection doctrine rates the covert threat as more dangerous per incident than the overt threat. Here's why. An overt threat triggers a defensive response. You see it. You react. You address it. A covert threat degrades your capability without triggering any response. You're losing resources and you don't know the rate. You don't know the volume. You don't know the source. By the time you detect the pattern, the damage is substantial and your countermeasure window has narrowed. Historical data from prolonged disaster zones shows covert neighbor theft beginning within the first week of supply disruption. It starts small. A few cans of fuel, vegetables from the garden, tools left outside. Then it escalates in sophistication, lock manipulation, timing movements around your schedule, coordinating with your absence patterns. This person already knows when you leave. They already know which areas of your property aren't visible from your windows. They've had years to observe your patterns. Run the math. A household losing 5% of stored fuel per week to covert siphoning hits operational failure in under 5 months. You never identified the threat. You never triggered a defensive response. You just slowly ran out of a critical resource and attributed it to consumption error. That's the covert operator's entire strategy. Slow, invisible degradation. Your countermeasure is inventory discipline and physical security. You log resources. You track consumption rates. You notice discrepancies early. You secure fuel with locking caps and tamper indicators. You position supplies where visual monitoring is possible. You install indicators on access points. Not alarms, indicators, a piece of tape, a positioned object, something that tells you a space was entered without advertising that you're watching. Here's where everything we've covered converges. Every single archetype on this list, every one of them. Their threat level is a direct function of how much your household revealed before the crisis started. Think about it. Deliveries your neighbors watched arrive at your door. Generator noise they heard during the last power outage. Social media posts about your weekend at the range. Casual barbecue conversations about your food storage hobby. Waste patterns showing bulk packaging in your trash. Visible infrastructure like solar panels, rain catchment, and antenna arrays. You built your own target package. You performed the intelligence collection on yourself and presented it to the entire neighborhood for free. 5 observable indicators tell your neighbors you're prepared. Delivery frequency and volume. Generator noise during outages. Waste patterns showing bulk consumption. Visible infrastructure modifications. Social media activity related to preparedness. If you've exposed 3 or more of these, every archetype on this list already has enough information to classify your household as a priority target. You didn't get compromised by a spy. You compromised yourself. Every OPSEC failure compounds, and most of them happened years before anything went wrong. Number 6, the Ideological Zealot. This one isn't seeking food. They aren't seeking safety. They're seeking to impose a framework. And a collapse just handed them the validation they've been waiting for. Whatever their pre-existing conviction, political, religious, conspiratorial, a societal breakdown confirms it. They were right all along. And now the legal and social constraints that contain their ideology have evaporated. Counterinsurgency doctrine classifies this as the true believer. It's the threat rated most resistant to negotiation or deterrence, because their motivation isn't transactional. You can't offer them food. You can't bargain with them. Their drive is existential. They believe they're fulfilling a purpose larger than survival, and that makes them immune to the rational cost-benefit calculations that govern every other archetype on this list. Here's how this manifests at the neighborhood level: scapegoating households based on perceived identity, organizing exclusion based on ideology, attempting to establish rule systems rooted in personal conviction rather than practical necessity. They don't need to be physically dangerous themselves. They need social influence. One charismatic zealot with a compelling narrative and 5 frightened neighbors creates a persecution framework that targets your household based on who you are rather than what you have. The civilian mistake is dismissing this as fringe behavior that won't survive real crisis conditions. The historical record shows the opposite. Prolonged crisis amplifies ideological behavior. It doesn't suppress it. When people are terrified and disoriented, they gravitate toward anyone offering certainty. The zealot offers absolute certainty. That makes them a magnet for the desperate and a targeting mechanism for the different. Your countermeasure is low-profile conformity combined with zero engagement on ideological topics. You do not debate. You do not challenge. You do not present yourself as an ideological target. You blend. You agree vaguely. You redirect to practical concerns. You never give this person a reason to categorize you, because once you're categorized, you're targeted, and collective targeting, driven by ideology, has no off switch. Number 7. The former ally who recalculates. This is the gut punch. This is the neighbor who is inside your plan. Mutual aid agreements, shared defense discussions, explicit inclusion in your post-collapse network. You shared everything with this person: supply quantities, storage locations, defensive positions, communication methods, vulnerability assessments. They know where your water is. They know where your ammunition is. They know your family's medical needs. They know which door doesn't lock properly. You told them, because they were on your team. Military insider threat doctrine was developed after green on blue attacks in Afghanistan. Trusted local partners turning weapons on the forces that trained and equipped them. The lesson was devastating and absolute. Defenses oriented outward are functionally zero against a threat that was invited past every layer. The recalculation occurs when their family's survival math no longer favors cooperation. Maybe your supplies are larger than theirs. Maybe their family grew. Maybe they brought in relatives you didn't plan for. Maybe they simply decided that taking is safer than sharing. The math changes. The alliance doesn't survive the math. And this person strikes at the point of maximum trust and minimum vigilance. This is rated the most dangerous archetype on this list for one reason. They possess the most detailed intelligence of any neighbor, and they were given that intelligence voluntarily. Every other threat requires collection. This one received a briefing. They know your strengths. They know your gaps. They know your schedule. They know your contingencies. They know what you're afraid of. Your countermeasure is compartmentalization from the beginning. No single person outside your household receives complete operational knowledge. Mutual aid agreements are structured with information firewalls. Supply details are approximated, never exact. Defensive plans shared with allies contain deliberate gaps. Vulnerability assessments are never disclosed. Trust is necessary for cooperation. Total transparency is not. The military learned this distinction through casualties. You can learn it through preparation. Every archetype on this list reduces to one principle. Proximity plus information equals vulnerability. 7 neighbors, 7 threat profiles. One common denominator: what they knew about you before the crisis determined what they could do to you after it started. That information can't be recalled once it's out, so you manage it now. While managing, it is still your choice. I've written up a full guide on operational security for prepared households that goes deeper on everything you need to know. First link in the description. What's the one thing your neighbors already know about you that you wish they didn't? Drop it in the comments.